Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Chris McNulty, here with my Partner Edition co-host, the one and only Mark Cashman.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chris. Very, very excited to be here on our next partner show. And this one, I think, is going to be a really good breadth view across the whole span of how a customer and a partner would leverage the intranet.
Are you already on our next show? Because I'm still doing this show. At Microsoft, our mission, simply put, is to deliver solutions to help individuals and organizations achieve more. We know we can't do it alone. Each month, we sit down with one of our partners who delivers solutions and services to help our customers on that journey with Microsoft.
On this episode, the next episode, we are going to be talking with Jesse Murray from Rightpoint and a special conversation with Doug Kalish, who is the head of knowledge management at Grant Thornton, a Rightpoint customer. What you're going to hear on the Intrazone is what I mentioned before, the breadth of what they implemented for Grant Thornton. They truly took in what do they need to do to really transform their intranet, to transform how their internal people and external people chat with each other, share content. And I think you'll see how they made choices along across how they might leverage Yammer, how they leverage Teams, and all throughout the mix, SharePoint. Chris, in working with Rightpoint for the Content Services program, what are some of the things that come to top of mind when you think of Rightpoint?
You know, with Project Cortex, we've been rolling out training for partners. And the first time we opened it up to partners, I was overwhelmed by the number of people who showed up from Rightpoint because, you know, these early days, it's fairly common for a partner to bring 1 to 3 people, and they brought a sizable cohort. So, you know, that's a commitment to what we're doing that I really find encouraging. It gives me hope that we're connecting with the right things.
Can you, maybe through the lens of Rightpoint, explain both for me and our audience, because I really am interested when somebody comes to the content services program and there's something still pretty new with Project Cortex and now elements that we've made public like SharePoint Syntax. There's the history of a lot of the value and the platform components that you're leveraging in Cortex that most likely these partners have been leveraging for a while. But can you talk through just, somebody like Rightpoint comes in for training, they have a good backlog of things that they've done in the past. And what does that carry forward into training with Cortex, but in that context of the legacy value of SharePoint?
That's a really interesting topic. When I think about Rightpoint, and they're similar to some of our other partners in this regard, is they're coming from the SharePoint ecosystem. And I'm mindful that this is not a transition, this is an addition, right? Because SharePoint remains this massive and massively growing platform to power content and collaboration and data and page experiences throughout M365. But they're coming with that as their frame and how they're looking at, for them, what begins as a technological journey. Rightpoint has, an interest in both maintaining and expanding their customer base, similar to how Microsoft thinks of it. You're always looking for an edge. Having worked in the channel before, you want to understand, how can I bring in something new that a customer hasn't seen before? And some of that are things that you can bring yourself. So Rightpoint definitely has a lot of discipline in how they have approached SharePoint-centric transformation. But they've been looking for a while to get better understanding of what we're doing with Cortex, so they know, in the words of the great Steve Fox from Microsoft, you want to skate to where the puck is headed. And there is gratuitous sports reference number 1 for today's podcast.
Very nice. I had to lace up and I had to sharpen my skates just for that one. If you think through what Rightpoint brings to the table and in this conversation that we're going to move to soon, how Rightpoint supported Grant Thornton, one of the things in the pre-brief, and I think just to get our audience knowing where the puck is going with this episode, is they noted on the Grant Thornton side that they had an intranet advisory board, which always warms my heart because that gets them thinking, or at least considering, what do I need to do for governance? What do I need to do for change management out to employees? And of course, what do we optimize for what our employees need? We know just from the basis of this being a good connection of a partner and customer to talk to on the Intrazone that SharePoint is definitely their base and a lot of where they build off of. But I think also interesting is that they've introduced and are getting value from the Power Platform with Power Automate and Power Apps. They're leveraging other third parties in addition to the Rightpoint services and products. You'll hear, I think, a couple of names throughout the episode that will sort of warm your heart in how they're leveraging the community and other partners. But when you start to think about Rightpoint with Grant Thornton, without giving away too much, what would you say is the most important thing before we hear from both partner and customer that our audience should know?
I think what's really important is to understand that customers hate getting down blind alleys. It is frustrating for the customer, for the partner, for Microsoft, if with a lack of information and direction, you build solutions that are not where the puck is headed. And when there are a range of third-party tools that you want to assemble the best mix, you're trying to assemble the best mix, not just for today, but for tomorrow. And when we declare these major initiatives, like Cortex, like Power Platform was several years ago, it's important to understand how can you future-proof what you're doing today. Grant Thornton is not in the business of being technical visionaries. That really needs to be Rightpoint's role. So one of the things kind of that they found through the training is the interest in training begins technically, but we also are investing time in talking about some of the business solutions and scenarios that are most relevant so they know how to translate that to a customer like Grant Thornton. Like, what is knowledge going to mean for a professional services firm like Grant Thornton, which is very different than what it might mean for, say, a manufacturing firm or a healthcare firm. Likewise, there are very different compliance requirements and workflow requirements. And of course, every customer brings their own unique set of needs to it. So the thing about Rightpoint is they do a great job in my experience with them. And I've been working with them particularly for a number of years at kind of having these standard sets of approaches and practices drawing from kind of that Microsoft 365 toolkit, but really being able then to listen and be creative and come up with a solution that drives towards that goal of helping Grant Thornton achieve more. I can keep talking about this, but the audience isn't here to hear us anymore.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to hear through Jesse and Doug where they see the puck going on behalf of our audience, learning from them. So let's move to hear from Rightpoint and Grant Thornton.
So up next on the Microsoft Partner Series of the Intrazone, we'd like to welcome Jesse from Rightpoint and focus our conversation today with Doug Kalish, who's head of knowledge management at Grant Thornton, who's a Rightpoint customer, a Microsoft customer, and we love being able to sit down and share customer stories with our audience. So gentlemen, welcome to the Intrazone.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with Jesse. Let me give you a chance to kind of introduce yourselves, what your role is at Rightpoint, on how you've come to be engaged in this wonderful Microsoft ecosystem with our customers.
Thank you, Chris. My name's Jesse Murray. I'm the head of employee experience at Rightpoint. I spent the last 20 or so years in digital workplaces, currently as a kind of a strategist, an evangelist of technologies and what innovative technologies can do to create employee experiences. Rightpoint, we're a global experience company, Microsoft partner since our inception. We've been helping our clients transform and connect their customer and employee experiences since 2007. We've always been a Microsoft partner. It's one of our deepest relationships. And our key focus in that time has really been on kind of modern workplace and Azure as our services.
So, Jesse, it's always great to hear. Where are you calling in from today?
Calling in from Detroit area, enjoying our early fall.
Doug, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about kind of your role at Grant Thornton, how you've been working in this space, and how you first became acquainted with Rightpoint.
So I lead the knowledge management practice for the U.S. member firm of Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton is in the professional services industry. So we sell and deliver audit services, tax services, and advisory or consulting services to our clients. Our clients are the Russell 2000, any large, medium-sized company in the U.S., as well as the federal government, lots of nonprofit organizations as well. So they need help with audit, with tax, or business consulting. We're there able to guide them. If you're in professional services, the important assets, whether it's our company or somewhere else, it's people and our knowledge. And so managing knowledge has been really critical for us. I've been in the consulting business for about 25 years, spent the first half of my career serving clients as a management consultant, and the second half working internally only as a knowledge management professional.
When you say something is knowledge, how do you deem something knowledge and then pass it through so that other people can go, oh, that's good knowledge. I'll leverage that knowledge and then spread it throughout the intranet. I know it may be a basic question, but I'd love to just get your take on how do you deem something knowledge, and then how does the technology then continue to support you?
So I think there's two aspects to that. There's the piece that I would call authoritative content. So this is core things that would be on your intranet. Where are our offices located? What's our org chart for our leadership? What are the benefits that I can get from my, HR organization? How do I access my pay stub? A lot of that is authoritative, and I think any intranet has to handle that. From a professional services firm, because we're in the business of selling and delivering services to our clients, there's also a whole ecosystem around the content related to that. So if you think about the value chain for any professional services business, it's how do you acquire clients? How do you then deliver services to them? And then for professionals, how do they keep learning about the industries and the business that we're in so that we can continue to provide that expertise back to our clients? So for us, when we talk about knowledge, it's really about, well, what is that business development lifecycle? What are the proposals we're writing? What are the client qualifications and case studies that we have? What are the pitch decks and marketing materials and glossy handouts and all those kinds of things? From an engagement delivery standpoint, we're talking about what are the methods that we use? What's the standard project plan that we might have for doing a risk assessment? What are some sample tools and templates? What are some cleansed deliverables of something we've done for one client that we can clean up and make available internally so that other people can start with something and they don't have to create something from scratch? And then learning. There's a whole tie back to, we serve clients in pretty much every major industry in the business world. How do we extract learnings from the work that we've done in the nonprofit space or work that we've done in the private equity space and capture that and make that available to people as well? So I think those two elements of that authoritative content about the organization, and then all of the great things you need to do the core work that we do around selling and delivering and learning.
I think in terms of document management, is a document that I manage through some life cycle. It's hard to define. A document is a thing. Knowledge might be multiple sets of things. And like you said, to different sets of personas, whether it's not for profit or a large governed entity, you're going to come across a different set of knowledge that's appropriate for them. And how do you put that package together, and how do you share that internally to then, of course, explain it externally? So if we use that as a guiding principle, or one of the guiding principles of the technology that you use underneath that, we selfishly already know that SharePoint is a big part of that, but by no means is SharePoint a knowledge management system unto itself. So how do you start to leverage and use the technology to accomplish what you just described, and more, of course?
I think it's important to think about all of the great tools that you have from Microsoft as putting an ecosystem together. I really have liked some of your messaging over the years around the Microsoft 365 suite being a set of tools that drive productivity and a way of creating a digital workspace. And I think most people listening to this know what a digital workspace is, but it's that virtual representation of where you do all of your work. And so to pull these things together and to get help from a great organization like Rightpoint that can guide us and coach us about how we assemble these things, there's just tremendous power there. So you're right, SharePoint is the base for all of this, but the Power Suite of Power Automate and Power Apps have really let us build on top of that, where we've got tools to be able to centrally do enterprise content management. We have tools to be able to collect feedback from users around the organization. We have tools that we can create to manage security on all of these documents and pages and things. So being able to take advantage of that suite on top of SharePoint is pretty powerful.
It's really interesting to hear you mention, Power Automate and Process. One thing that we talk about within our engineering teams is knowledge transactions. And I'm sure you've experienced the pain point of the information, the knowledge is out there. You just have to know where to look or when to look. What do you see as the real opportunities for making that a smoother process for your consultants and analysts?
Chris, when we set out to do the digital workspace, we came up with some guiding principles with Rightpoint, and they were search, access, and personalization. And it's that third one, personalization, that I think really speaks to what you're talking about. There is so much stuff, so much content out there that people could get to. And what we think is important is, how do we serve this up to you in a way that makes it easy for you to do your day-to-day job? We're integrated with our HR system. We're integrated with our learning management system. So we know some things about you. We know what your home office is. We know what part of the business you're in. We know what industries you tend to spend your time in. We know what career level you are. And so because we know stuff about you, without even being creepy, without following your cookies or anything like that, we can actually present things to you that are relevant because we have all of this great content in our ecosystem.
Jesse, from the time that you got the first call, and it may have been now that you've been working with Doug and team for quite some time, but can you describe how the ask came to you, or where you initially saw some of the pain points where you could bring value? How was that first conversation that led to then what maybe you first started to approach with Grant Thornton from a Rightpoint perspective?
This is a while ago. I think the thing that came through on the ask, and it was, I think Doug had already mentioned this earlier, was the difference between working on an intranet and maybe challenging that a little bit and considering more of a workspace-oriented model. And really the difference there being, what are we trying to drive as an outcome? Right? Your intranet has content, but how do we turn that into something that is going to drive an efficiency gain or is going to result in higher adoption or engagement? And I think really what our focus was right from the beginning, even in the sales process, I think when Doug and I were in Chicago, was like, well, I think there's more opportunity out here than what we're initially talking about, and then opening that up to understand where we might go. And out the other side of that did come, right, Power Apps and Automate integration and Yammer communities and SharePoint and what have you, not really focused on the technologies to start. It was, what can we drive as a measurable outcome for the organization that we can tie a value back to?
And Jesse, if I could add on to that, I think when we first started having conversations, you really impressed us with your view of focusing on the employee experience. We knew we wanted to evolve past an intranet and really have a true digital workspace. But I think what you all brought to the table was this holistic view centered on the employee, and that you could then bring digital design capabilities, your implementation experience. And then I think the other piece that we all bonded over that made us a good fit together was culture. We at Grant Thornton have a very deliberate culture. We think that's a real differentiator for us in the marketplace. And to be able to sit down, even in the first couple of meetings where you didn't pitch the whole time, you said, hey, let's go up to the whiteboard, let's design some things or get some guiding principles out here. Just that whole collaboration and the agility and responsibility that came right from the first conversation. That was a real winning pitch for us.
I can see that there was the advisory to the advisors and are now continuously advising. With the initial kickoff beyond the end user experience or the desired outcomes of what you wanted employees at Grant Thornton to experience, with this kind of shining light of here's the art of the possible, here's what we know, here's what we value in helping you move forward. There's an approach at Grant Thornton to have an advisory approach to the intranet, and the intranet has many parts. So willingness for whatever you feel comfortable sharing on your parts of the intranet. But when you take the advisory approach to the next steps of the intranet, what are we going to do next? I think a lot of the questions sometimes are, what are we going to start to take advantage of that we already have? What are we going to start to configure and use? You shared a little bit around the Power Platform, but even beyond that, there may be, different configurations that you can do on the administration side to up-level or unblock things, or just add additional services. But then it starts to get interesting when you start to think, what are we going to customize? What are we going to add code to or buy that's already built that we can bring in that's a proven component to this broader Microsoft 365 intranet? I'd love to start with hearing your approach to how that advisory council goes through deciding what projects are we going to take next? How are we going to do it? And if it's the right thing to do, we're actually willing to build or buy. And that's a good decision. And then, we can follow up with that on hearing what are some of those actual decisions that you've made to hear maybe an example or two. But maybe starting with Doug, the advisory council that you have in place, Rightpoint sounds like a part of that. How do you go about some of those decision components?
So it was really interesting. When we had our old platform, the sense of ownership for our intranet was our KM organization, but it was very administrative focused. And so when I came to Grant Thornton with a few other folks about 5 years ago, we really wanted to make this something that was owned by lots of key players in the firm. And so we put together a governance body where we had other internal leaders that have a stake in the game. So if you think about other organizations that put an intranet or a digital workspace together, we're bringing together people like the head of communications, the head of our HR organization, the head of our information technology organization, and then also bringing partners to the table from other internal functions that were really important. So risk and legal affairs in our business is a really big deal, especially with all the audit and tax work that we do. It's very sensitive. Marketing is really important. We had an innovation organization that we wanted to bring to the table. So bringing all of those key players together, along with leaders from our advisory business, our audit business, our tax business, our public sector practice, getting them all to the table, we formed that Intranet Advisory Board and gave this group an active oversight role. And we had them participate in the vendor selection. The leaders from our firm were, at the table and listening to different proposals right from the very beginning. And so they came along all the way. And one thing before I answer some of your other questions, the other piece I think that's really interesting about our Intranet Advisory Board is the name IAB, Intranet Advisory Board. It's kind of a misnomer because once we started to use the Microsoft 365 suite, we realized that this governing body had to do more than just look out for the intranet. And so over time, we pulled in Yammer for enterprise social. We pulled in Stream as we started to think about what our video was going to look like. And for myself as a knowledge management professional, that was a big step to say, I'm used to focusing on things around collaborating and reusing content and publishing content. But there's this whole other world that's out there. And I think we had to be willing to own everything. It was a mindset shift for us to being what I would call a KM purist, to really taking on your Microsoft vision of productivity. So, OneDrive and things like that, pulling that all together in governance.
You figured us out that the intranet is the Trojan horse.
Yes. Was that by design?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Chris, anyway, so what we're talking about is, but I think if you take it through that lens, I honestly, and this is a silly thought sometimes, but I do think the intranet has always been more than just portals and sites. But to the extent of now, it's a lot more. And certainly that has only been recently. But if it leads that advisory council to advise more on how are we going to use what we're buying, which again can be more than Microsoft 365. We know you have investments in line of business applications. You've got investments in legacy applications that you've built and managing those over time. So we know it's no small feat, and we know that IAB probably has a bigger footprint than even what you just shared.
I'm recalling a presentation I saw from Salesforce actually about 5 years ago about using Chatter, which is their communities technology, similar to a Yammer, to build an intranet for a particular customer. And it didn't look anything like an intranet. Certainly for folks who have been kind of steeped in SharePoint, it wasn't anything I would recognize as a series of portals. But it was a technical way of being able to unite people to discover information, get questions answered, and connect to other people who might be able to help them moving forward. It's really interesting to not let, I think, that blue box of a SharePoint portal constrict really what you're trying to do in this space.
If I could add in a comment to kind of build on that, one thing that I would note that Rightpoint had recognized very early was the fact that the IAB already existed. I mean, it's so critical to have organizational buy-in when you're going after a program of this nature, to already have stakeholders at the table with a desired outcome, or at least the desire to have a desired outcome, right? That was a huge step. And with Grant Thornton already being there, you had mentioned our cultural connection. It also allowed us to really jump directly in. If you don't have an advisory group or a stakeholder group for your workspace, that is a good first step. Right. That is ownership. That is accountability. And it's ultimately going to connect better to the organization.
Doug, I'd love to kind of get your insight on Jesse's point there. I mean, there's lots of guidance that says for major technical initiatives, especially for knowledge initiatives, business buy-in, business stakeholdership is super important. I think everyone knows that, but getting it can be a challenge. What's worked for you at kind of getting that engagement with the right partners across the organization?
I think transparency is really key, Chris. The whole idea here is that this is digital transformation. We're not just turning on a new intranet. This is changing the way that people access information and content. And when I think about the ROI that we're trying to create here, one of the elements of that is, can we create a better user experience so that people are more likely to stay with our firm for a long period of time? And so I think Jesse's right that you have to have a real vision around this, that this is not just a replacement of an intranet. This is true digital transformation. And so to be able to package that up in a real story and go have conversations with key leaders around the organization and explain to them why it's important for them to have a seat at the table, that was critical for us. And I think with our monthly intranet advisory board meetings, we're being really transparent. We're showing the roadmap of where we're going. We're not getting into all the detail with Azure DevOps and specifically what we're doing in a particular sprint, but we're showing the sprint by sprint plan, and we're soliciting input. We're asking them to make decisions at certain points in time along the way. We're asking them to nominate volunteers to be part of what another governing body of ours called the Practitioner Working Group, so we can get the voice of the customer to help us shape some of the designs and to help us with testing. And so bringing these leaders along and finding concrete, specific things that they can do to help guide this and give them opportunities to weigh in and make decisions, I think that's critical for the success of this. And I think our teaming partners would tell you that this has been a journey that we've all gone on together with all of these leaders, with Rightpoint as an advisor along the way, all of us coming alongside each other to figure this out.
Would you mind just taking us through one concrete example where you can describe, something that went into the IAB and a decision that then came out? And if it were one that involved Rightpoint and Grant Thornton working together, as big or as small as you want to highlight, we'd just love to know the problem that went in, the requirements that you sort of put on it, as others would tell you, the desired outcomes.
Happy to. The first example, which I think is a vendor selection process, which is a very good one. And then I'll give you a recent example of something we just looked at last month as we were entering our new fiscal year. When we went through the vendor selection process, we partnered with our procurement organization and we laid out a timeline that said, we're going to get our requirements together at this stage in time. We're going to put this out for bid. We're going to ask people to come present. We're going to review things. We're going to get feedback, and then we'll do some final presentations. So we were very clear up front with what the selection process was. And then we asked people, how involved do you want to be? And we carved out specific roles for people. So when we have vendor presentations, do you want to be in the room for that? We'll fly in and we'll have you there for that conversation. Or you want to be there virtually? Do you want to be part of the scoring? Do you just want to listen? If you want to be part of the scoring, here's the criteria that we're going to use. Here's the scorecard. And so in that selection process, we allowed our members of our governance body to participate to the degree that they were able to, or if they weren't able to, if they wanted to have a delegate come along. And I was really pleased. We had a lot of participation. And Jesse, I'm sure you'll remember that the rooms were pretty full for some of the final presentations. And we had a lot of folks who listened in. And so I think going through that formal exercise of a selection process and giving them discrete roles, especially around weighing the presentations against the criteria, that was really powerful for us. A more recent example would be our fiscal year runs through the end of July. And so as we go into the new fiscal year, we went back through our backlog that we've been grooming over a long period of time. And we're re-looking at the epics and the features that we have. And we present this back to our intranet advisory board and say, okay, let's do a check-in here. Here's all of the areas where we said we wanted to make some improvements. What are your priorities for your business this year? And we had an open discussion. I think we spent about 45 minutes just everyone riffing off of each other of like, hey, we'd like to be able to have more chatbot functionality. Yeah, that would be great. Not only could I use that from an HR perspective, but that would actually be really helpful as we think about how we could support our tax professionals as they're working on providing tax guidance. And so being able to bounce those ideas off of each other and then present the group with, by the way, here are the main epics and features that we have in our backlog. Would you help us prioritize these? And we gave them some homework. And after the discussion, and they went through and said, okay, of the things that are on this list, these are the 3 or 4 things that are most important to our business. And then we feed that back into the planning and grooming process from an agile standpoint. And then we can make some decisions about, you know what, let's get a research project going with a virtual assistant sooner rather than later, because we heard from 4 of our advisory board members that this is really important. So to be able to engage a leadership body like this with understanding their priorities, giving them a chance to talk to each other. They don't always get to talk to each other. They're busy running their own businesses, but to learn where some of those shared priorities are and then have that bubble up on our priority list, that was really powerful for us.
Jesse, does that groove with you? You feel like Rightpoint maybe is building bots and spreading the knowledge and getting in there? What I really mean to ask is on the outcome of this, what have been some of the opportunities that Rightpoint got pulled into when they went into the backlog and then, started to lay down something that was concrete, but maybe just needed a last little turn of the knob or guidance before it was put in place?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would highlight immediately is the fact that there is a backlog. The fact that there is engagement from the business and prioritization of investment to value, right? That's the difference between a project and a continually improving workspace, which is driving business value. I will actually highlight one of the specific items that came up during the project. It was search. Search for a workspace and an intranet is always, we want to have a better search. But there were some very specific requirements in this search ask from the different stakeholders. And what it really meant was, I just want a single search. I just want to search. And then you get me whatever I want to see. And in the requirement level, how technically complex that is, we don't really care. And I can't remember, Doug, how many systems there were, 10, 13, something like that, that ultimately were all these back-end systems, inclusive of SharePoint and that content, but back-end tax systems and what have you. Putting that as one universal search experience. And this, from a time perspective, this decision was probably 2 years ago from a decision perspective. And this came down to do we build? Is there something out of the box, or do we buy something? And ultimately, the process of review there wasn't an out of the box option at the time. Although I would argue Microsoft Search is probably there or getting there now, and that's kind of what one of the things Rightpoint does is constantly look at those. Building one from scratch, obviously, you're not going to do that. What we did find was Grant Thornton one of their stakeholders actually owned a different third-party search tool that was used for their website, and that search tool could offer the capabilities. So we ended up with a build and customize option integrated technically through Azure Active Directory into the workspace as a search capability. And so that was kind of some of the thought process that we went through there. Now, what am I doing on the other side of that at Rightpoint? Well, we look at what's happening, and I think Mark had talked about seeing things being done in market, and then Microsoft responds to those. Right? Obviously, Microsoft Search, and I would also point out Project Cortex, are knowledge and search investments that have been growing over the past couple of years. And our job, or at least our job as we perceive it, is to be on top of those changes as they're being built, engaging in previews, collecting feedback from customers, and with Microsoft to understand how to align those going forward.
You're sort of dangling, a tasty morsel in front of me, given my history with Project Cortex. I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit, and would, love to also, Doug, have you chime in on this as well. When you think about the investments that Microsoft is making in knowledge across the board, Project Cortex is a hero, but we're capitalizing on work that we've done with search, with communities like Yammer. Where are you hopeful of being in a few years' time with our customers?
I got to tell you, in my 20 plus years working with Microsoft, Project Cortex is probably the most exciting thing I've seen ever. It really gets to some problem statements we've worked on the periphery. And I'll highlight a couple of things. Doug had mentioned, right, knowledge is always part of an intranet. It has to be, right? That's kind of its purpose in life. He started getting into more of the delivery oriented, like how do we gather knowledge from the work that we're doing? And that's one of those concepts in Project Cortex, the AI gathered tacit knowledge. That's huge, right? Because a knowledge program a lot of times is built on effort. effort applied by people. And the ability to use an artificial intelligence as an assistant to that to help gather that content and help curation of knowledge, that's enormous. And I think that's one of the largest efficiency opportunities out there in the next 2, 3, 5 years. The other part, though, and I want to make sure that I highlight this, activation of knowledge is maybe in the first year or two more important than the AI part, I think, in my view. The ability to take that knowledge and put it inside the tools at the moment I might need it, whether that be Outlook or Teams or Word or what have you, or even SharePoint, activating that knowledge inside my work is just a huge jump. And then one that's near and dear to my heart, we spend a lot of time in our content strategy groups working on information architecture and taxonomy. The ability to do some machine-taught auto-tagging. That's been out there for so many years as needs. I know all of our customers have asked us, can we auto-tag content intelligently? Those ones probably make up the biggest jump for me as to what I expect to see over the next coming years.
I'm excited about Cortex too. I think there's tremendous potential there. When we first heard about it, we spun up a research team. So we asked a few folks on our organization to go see what you can learn. And, Chris, the office hours and all the things that you've been sharing, the podcasts, the white papers, we've been learning a lot as you've had your 75 or so early adopters do that. So, we're trying to come along. We're trying to see how we can plug something like that into our ecosystem. The potential, like Jesse said, though, is tremendous to be able to capture all of this knowledge, to use AI to pull this out and bundle it and curate it in ways that don't require too much human intervention. But also, one of the things that I love that seems to be in there is there's also some choices that an administrator has around security, around should we include this, should we not include this. And so I'm excited about the possibilities of what's there with Cortex. And Mark, this kind of goes back to a question you asked early on, which is how do you know when to plug in a Microsoft tool versus a third-party tool or to build something? And so, it's a combination of things. It's getting the advice from Jesse and Rightpoint around where they're seeing the market going, what tools they've used with other clients that might be worth bringing to bear. But I think we have a responsibility as the client as well that we've got to be paying attention to the Microsoft 365 roadmap. I know this is old technology, but I've got some RSS feeds still where I'm subscribed to the latest things that are coming on the roadmap. And I'm reading that instead of going to Facebook because it's interesting to see what's coming on the horizon, and that informs our decision making around build or buy or integrate. And so to be able to get the advice from Rightpoint, to see what's on the roadmap. Back when we used to be able to go to conferences, I enjoyed the speakers, but I actually really enjoyed the vendor tables outside even more because I learned so much from what all the vendors were doing just to get a sense of what's happening. I get a lot of phone calls from vendors who want to sell me the latest shiny object. And I've learned over the years to actually take those calls and not ignore them outright because there's tons of things that you can learn from those. And when you find people who are just willing to share their knowledge and not try to push something, I'm going to come back to you in a year or two when something fits into our roadmap. So there's a real art and science to taking in all of these different inputs and getting some outside counsel from a great organization like Rightpoint to figure out like, hey, do we do Cortex now? Is this something that we wait and see and put it, a little bit later on our roadmap? Do we want to be first? Do we want to wait for things to happen? Putting all of those things together, I think, again, that's part of the fun of being partnered with Microsoft here is you have so many tools and so many great ways to integrate that you can start to assemble these things to solve real business problems.
People ask me directly oftentimes, like, what value does Rightpoint provide? There's the work that we do, which I think is the engagement and program that Doug and I have been talking about. But then there's the other things that we do, which is what is Cortex and what's it going to be, and joining that preview program and kind of knowing what the market's supposed to be doing and when. That isn't always visible until we have a conversation like, hey, Doug, I think this feature or this new capability or this roadmap item looks like it's going to be impactful. Let's bring that through your feedback cycle, your feedback loop with your practitioners and your IAB and kind of present that and kind of push it up against the wall. That's kind of the two sides of our relationship, and the value we do is the customer facing stuff, but then just staying also up to date on the roadmap and where things are going.
Jesse, I was just going to add, there's the value of the crystal ball, what's coming, and to have people that are able to not only have read the same article, but to be able to also translate it. What does that mean for what we don't need to do anymore, or what can we now do? I also think there's value, and I'm just taking a little guess at how you've built in agility and transition so that you may start out with something custom, but transition to something that's more out of the box over time. Like you had mentioned, a unique offering for search. And at some point in time, you may transition more to just out of the box Microsoft search. And I can see that as a common way to approach building anything that wouldn't drive you crazy, also wouldn't make you feel like you just threw a bunch of money that was for waste, that it was the right thing to do at the right time with the right mindset, that in maybe 2 or 3 years, we don't need to do that anymore. I think there's a lot of value in the approach that you're taking.
Yeah, and that describes a large portion of my and my team's lives, is understanding, what's there, what's ready. In our world, that's our IP is called Spark Workspace. That's the things that we create that are reusable. When Microsoft does something better, it's time to get rid of some of those things. I would also note, and I've been known to be blunt about my assessments of things over the years, not everything that comes out is ready right away. Right. For certain organizations or technologically or for rollout. Right. And I think being able to measure the right time for those types of things and feed them through a governing body like Grant Thornton has is really critical.
And Jesse, these can be big things and small things, right? I mean, it can be as big as what's the search engine that we're using. And I like that point of eventually you have to decide, hey, do we still need this, or can we go get, something out of the box from Microsoft? But it can be as simple as a web part too. I mean, like you mentioned with Spark, you had Yammer integration with SharePoint really early on. And for some of the things that we were trying to solve for on our homepage around communication and building virtual communities, we plugged that web part in, and that was a really key part of our homepage. But, Mark and Chris, like you guys have said, Microsoft is always evolving and improving things. And so when the newer web part comes out for Yammer, we're able to say, hey, you know what? This one's actually better than the one that Rightpoint created. Let's all agree. Let's go with the new one. And we can have those kinds of conversations with Rightpoint and say, okay, let's swap this out. So it can be any scale and anywhere along the spectrum of a big decision or a small decision to be able to make those choices. And I think that's really cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's stay on topic here, because you've been talking about some of the solutions that Rightpoint has worked on in the market, and obviously Grant Thornton's providing additional resources. Where can our audience go to learn more about Rightpoint and Grant Thornton after today's broadcast?
I would encourage you to go to rightpoint.com. Go directly to our employee experience highlighted content. That's the quickest way. We have the case study with Grant Thornton also on our website. And my name's Jesse Murray. If you're interested, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty accepting of invites.
GrantThornton.com is a great resource for learning about the things that we do externally. We provide tremendous services to our clients. If you want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing from a knowledge management perspective, the case study that Jesse mentioned is great. We also last year were an inaugural winner of the APQC Excellence in Knowledge Management Award, and we were one of 4 enterprise organizations to earn that award. And there's a really great write-up on some of the things that we're doing and some of our plans on APQC's website as well.
Congratulations. You both mentioned events, and if there are any that Jesse, you and team are going to be in a virtual sense participating at or would encourage people to go to, anything specific to Rightpoint that we can highlight as an upcoming event?
There will be an event later in October as we kind of review the announcement at Ignite and kind of talk about Project Cortex in its more official sense.
Terrific. Well, gentlemen, on behalf of our audience and Mark and myself, thank you so much for coming in. We look forward to watching this unfold across your organizations in the months to come.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
So up next, we want to give the audience a little bit of a library of where to go for more information. So this is a special one-time chapter for the IntraZone, Mark. Did you know that?
I did know that, but now that you're telling me, I'm remembering what I did know.
When we are compiling things for show notes, usually there's some references, and it's great to hear it. But when we talk to Contoso, they say, oh, just visit us at contoso.com and follow at Contoso. And when we asked Grant Thornton and Rightpoint, they gave us a pretty broad range of things to look at. And we are going to put these in the show notes. We're not going to read the URLs out, /point.curlybrace. We know that that's why they go in the show notes.
Are you just trying to get us to exactly an hour? Because we can fill it with HTTP this and HTTP that.
I was going through this and I was really impressed to see some of the articles that they shared that for an inaugural Knowledge Management Award, the APQC picked 13 organizations and Grant Thornton was one of them. So that's really encouraging and we can't wait to see where they're able to take their knowledge solutions once Cortex becomes part of their arsenal.
Yeah, so we're going to have a bunch of links like we always do. There's another one where it's just specifically a little bit more of a deeper dive in a written format between Rightpoint and Grant Thornton, what they accomplished. I hope it just resonates with what you just heard, but it also gives a little bit more writing and a couple other links from the link, so you can just get Linkville like you've never seen.
And Rightpoint's got some really great thought leadership that they've shared with us around, the confluence of knowledge management and the future of work coming together with employee experience. It's really interesting that, that they're putting those building blocks together in those directions.
Let's move on to think about and hear about what are some of the upcoming events. You heard a little bit from Rightpoint, some of the things that they do for training and the ways that they offer and some of the events that they'll be attending. There's a few other things that Chris and I wanted to mention. Just a real quick list of upcoming events that are those additional ways to engage with the community, to get learning, to take workshops, and certainly if you have questions, get them answered. So the first one that we wanted to talk about is on Saturday, October 24th. This continues the Collab Days, and it's in Benelux. So if you are in that area or you want to sign in and potentially listen into in French or sometimes in English, you should join Collab Days Benelux on Saturday, October 24th.
And if you don't work weekends, the following Monday, Rightpoint will be presenting at Learning Day as part of Collab Summit on October 26th, followed by Networking Day for the Collab Summit on October 27th.
The one thing that's really interesting about the networking day is it's going to be, if you can and you want, all in virtual reality. You can do it through your browser, through a PC, or if you don an HTC Hive or any way to connect to the Microsoft VR stack, the whole networking day will be in VR. And also one thing on the learning day is it's all tutorials, and both of those are free.
Coming up, we've spoken about them before, and we'll speak about it again. GlobalCon 4, December 1st through 4th. It's a great virtual conference. This will be the fourth one they've presented this year, and so I'm sure they'll follow up with GlobalCon 5 sometime early next year.
I think so. They always have good keynotes, great sessions, and real great engagement, over a course of a couple of days.
So it's great to be able to review all of the additional information and events here. If you have more information to share on this podcast or an event you'd like us to feature on an upcoming episode, please write to us and we'd be happy to feature it. That's a wrap. We are done with yet another episode of the Intrazone Partner Edition. I want to especially thank Jesse from Rightpoint and Doug from Grant Thornton for coming in to talk to us today.
You can check out our show page for links to all that was discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theintrazone. And if you're interested in other shows by Microsoft, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts.
Send us your questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering and product teams. You can email us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000.
So now you know where the puck is going, and if you enjoy the show and want to help others find it, please rate and review the show like we are your favorite grandchild. The one that you like to have on your knee, not the one that you go, yeah, you can play outside. Please tell all your friends and colleagues about the show, share the SharePoint love, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Chris McNulty and Mark Cashman, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 partner-powered intelligent intranet.
Boop 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 boopy doopy doo. Boop boopy doopy doopy doo. Boo doopy 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 doo. Bow.